We're just waiting hello everyone, welcome. We're just waiting one more minute for an additional speaker who hasn't quite joined us yet. Please bear with us, and many more attendees who are still joining. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this side event at the 50th session of the UN Human Rights Council. There are still some people joining us, but we're going to get started because we have quite a few speakers today and lots to cover. So, as I said, welcome. The name of the event today is Libya, a critical time for accountability, and the role of the UN fact-finding mission in supporting the rule of law and sustainable peace in Libya. My name is Lucy McKernan. I'm the Acting Geneva Director at Human Rights Watch, and I'll be moderating today. I just wanted to start with the usual points of logistics, which I'm sure we're all used to by now, but letting you know that we have Arabic, English interpretation. So please use the channel at the bottom of the screen to select which channel you'd like to listen to. I also need to let you know that the event is being live streamed on Facebook and recorded. I want to start also by thanking the co-sponsors for this event. On the state side, we have the Permanent Mission of Switzerland and the Permanent Mission of Germany. So thank you very much to them for their support. We also have as a co-sponsor the United Nations Support Mission in Libya. And they're also going to give us some introductory remarks today. So I'll hand over to them in just a moment, but thank them for their co-sponsorship. And finally, we have 8 NGOs who are co-sponsoring the event. I won't read them all out. Their names, the logos and names are all on the flyer, but I wanted to point out that we have a mix of national, regional and international NGOs who are all working on the human rights situation in Libya and are co-sponsoring today. I also wanted to point out that the organisers of the event did reach out to the government of Libya, both in writing and by telephone, to invite them to participate, and if they wished to take the floor today, but they didn't respond to our outreach. So moving to the substance, of course, the event is about the human rights situation in Libya and the role in particular of the UN fact-finding mission on Libya, which is, as you will know, due for renewal at this session of the Human Rights Council. The fact-finding mission was established in June 2020 by a resolution of the Human Rights Council. It has a mandate to investigate violations and abuses of international human rights law and international humanitarian law throughout Libya by all parties since 2016, and importantly, with a view to ensuring accountability and preventing further violations. The fact-finding mission will present its next report at this session of the Human Rights Council on the 6th of July. As you will know, this is an item 10 resolution, and it's presented by the African group. We're waiting to see the text of that resolution for this session. You may have also seen that the NGOs who are co-sponsoring this event and together with other NGOs have sent a public joint call to the Human Rights Council members to renew the mandate of the fact-finding mission at this session. So we're going to start, as I said, with some introductory remarks from the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, UNSMIL. We will then have 5 panelists speaking, including the chair of the fact-finding mission, which we're very pleased that they're able to join us today. And then there'll be time for questions and answers from attendees of the session. As usual, if you do have questions that you would like to ask, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, or you can put them in the chat box if that's easier, and we'll come to those at the end, as I said, when we move to the Q&A session. and we'll put those to the speakers. Please identify yourself when you're entering your questions. So, as I said, I'm now passing over to Suki Nagra. She is the Director of the Human Rights, Transitional Justice and Rule of Law Division at the United Nations Support Mission in Libya. She's going to give some introductory remarks. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Lucy. I hope everyone can hear me. All good? Great. So thank you so much, and a very good afternoon to everyone. I'm honoured to join this panel, and first and foremost would like to thank the Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies for hosting this event, and we're very much honoured to co-sponsor the event. I'm also very delighted to be amongst such esteemed company, indeed the chair of the FFM, Mr. Auajjar, the Defender Centre for Human Rights, Lawyers for Justice in Libya, and indeed Amnesty International. As you noted, this event comes at a critical time in Libya's path towards justice and truth. And as you also mentioned, the Human Rights Council is expected to discuss the report and findings of the FFM, but also discuss the renewal of their mandate. So this event, it's very much at a critical time right now, and we're supporting the extension of the mandate for a number of reasons. We've engaged in robust advocacy in this regard, both with GNU, the government of Libya, and of course, member states. From our perspective, mandate extension is critical so that the fact-finding mission can continue its vital work to advance human rights and indeed to contribute to sustainable peace and what we are calling, fostering a rights-based reconciliation process in Libya. There's a lot of talk about reconciliation, so I think the issues that the FFM are investigating and reporting on are critical to that particular agenda. As you may have seen, the co-chairs of the Working Group on International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, which UNSMIL Human Rights, that's my office, co-chairs with the Netherlands and Switzerland, we issued a statement recently calling for the extension of the FFM's mandate publicly, noting that the FFM's work, which has been summarised in its reports issued in October 2021 and also in March 2022, is far from complete, and that the extension of the mandate will enable the fact-finding mission to continue this important area of work in all parts of Libya. As you mentioned, the mandate was first issued in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic, and they're expected to cover violations from 2016 onwards. That's a huge amount of time to cover with an enormous amount of violations and widespread violations. So we fully support the mandate extension from that perspective. And we've also stressed in our statements that no other entity has the mandate and capacity to conduct this type of work at this time. So essentially, the fact-finding mission, in my view, has only really started to scratch the surface in terms of implementing their mandate and carrying out the essential functions. Given that the mandate extends from 2016, there's countless violations perpetrated since this period, and including mass atrocity crimes, and the need to, there needs to be robust investigations of violations perpetrated by all parties. So more time is without a doubt needed for them to even start to meet the terms of their mandate. As we've often noted, a common thread running through all the human rights challenges in Libya is impunity. And regrettably, for many victims and survivors, justice and accountability remains elusive, and indeed it's painfully slow. And just would like to refer to the Abu Salim case, which, as many of you know, was recently referred to the military justice system by the appeals court in Tripoli. This follows an acquittal in December 2022, where the court, 2021 or 2020, where the court argued that the statute of limitations applied. We were reassured last year, last June, when the Supreme Court ruled that there could be no statute of limitations for crimes against humanity. But the recent development for me really highlights how there's the inability or unwillingness of the national justice system to try individuals for even some of the most serious violations of international law. The Abu Salim massacre took place in 1996, 26 years ago. So it's really, I'm mentioning this case because it highlights many issues that we're talking about in terms of continued impunity, slow and elusive justice, and the need for mechanisms like the FFM. Will we be speaking about cases like Tahuna in 2 decades from now? You know, I certainly, you know, where victims are lacking in accountability and there's continued impunity for the perpetrators. So I really hope that that's not the case. And one way really to support victims of these kind of heinous crimes is to ensure that mechanisms such as the FFM continue to document and report on incidents of violations and to push for accountability and to ensure that there is that fact-finding element. As we've seen in many other contexts, addressing legitimate grievances of the past and ensuring that root causes and very drivers of conflict are identified contributes to preventing further conflict. And I think the FFM has a critical and vital role in this regard. When these grievances are left unaddressed, it really does become a seeping wound, feeding into these toxic cycles of revenge between communities and fueling the very spoilers who want to undermine peace. And we're seeing that every day in Libya, sadly. And I would also like, I mentioned reconciliation, and I would just like to say that there has been a lot of emphasis on reconciliation, but it's often spoken about in terms of forgiving, moving forward and forgetting the past. And it's essential that we continue to highlight that reconciliation has to be based on the principles of transitional justice with a focus on truth, accountability and reparations. And as UNSMIL, our position has been very clear in this regard, and we've echoed this message continually in all fora and in all discussions with the government and state institutions. And we've also reiterated that there can be no amnesty for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And noting that we've, those responsible for grave human rights violations, when they're exempt from criminal sanction, you know, they're often emboldened, you know, and they commit further crimes with impunity. And this is also a pattern that we're starting to document in Libya. And I think it's very important for the FFM to also contribute to this kind of documentation. Ultimately, I'll just say in closing that any political or other process, it has to ensure that the door to justice remains firmly open. And this is, again, our message in terms of the ongoing political process, that the door to justice cannot be closed in any way. By publicising key trends and the fact-finding missions work will definitely contribute to ensuring accountability for Libyan victims, and that to ensure that their voices are heard and that truth and justice is honoured. It's clear that the extension of the mandate will contribute very much in terms of a peaceful future, but also in terms of efforts towards reconciliation that's based on justice, accountability, and principles of transitional justice. So I'll just end there, and again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Suki, for that, for your introductory remarks. Much appreciated. I noted down in particular your characterisation of the FFM work as, fostering a rights-based reconciliation process in Libya. I really like that. Thank you also for reminding us about the public call made by UNSMIL for the renewal of the mandate of the FFM. I think that's really important to underline. And emphasising that no other entity has the mandate to conduct this type of vital work. It is a unique mandate in that respect, but also underlining the prevention role that the FFM plays. So thanks very much. We'll move on now to our panelists. We're going to start with Marwan Tashani. He is a Libyan human rights defender and representing the International Commission of Jurists and the Defender Center for Human Rights. I just wanted to remind everyone too that we do have Arabic English interpretation, so please make sure you have selected the correct channel below. And just a reminder to panelists to speak slowly so the interpreters can catch what you say. So now I will pass over to Marwan. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. My greetings to all of you, and thank you for the organizing committee of this important event, which comes at a very appropriate time for the convening of the Human Rights Council in Geneva. Of course, we all know that on the basis of requests from Libya, and with the condolence of the Libyan groups, we have launched the fact-finding mission in Libya to put an end to the violations of the international law and the breaches that are perpetrated in Libya, which started in 2016 and which was published on the basis of Article 10, and that was a positive move from Libya to ask for the setting of this fact-finding mission here. And I think that it's quite important and nice to see that Libya reiterate its request to expand the mission, this mission for many reasons, among which we can notice that at the outset, the mission faced so many logistic and financial challenges. And also the propagation of the pandemic did impact greatly the work of this fact-finding mission, and there was some time missing of its mission, and during which we cannot conduct the work of the fact-finding mission properly. This enhances the need for the expansion of this mission. I wanted to remind that the violations of human rights in Libya are quite widespread in the East and West, and of course they cannot be undermined by the position of the authorities here, at least at the geographical level, given that these widespread violations call for the need to document such violations and to make sure that we hold accountable all the parties that have perpetrated these crimes from the judicial institutions in Libya are really unable to put up with all this huge number of violations, even though they do try according to the limited resources provided. So imagine that this mission can provide the support and the assistance for the judicial institutions within Libya, especially in relation to the preservation of the proofs and to provide the important arguments that would help the judicial authorities to do the necessary investigations and to prosecute the wrongdoers. So the question of impunity did play a big role in the perpetration of these violations, given that these perpetrators do feel safe because they are sure that they will not be held accountable and they will not be prosecuted at any given time. And this definitely leads to the reiteration of all these crimes and all these violations. with regards to the expansion of the mission, and that we seriously will be endorsed by the international community in favor of Libya. So here we believe that the job of the fact-finding mission does contribute effectively to preserving the arguments and to provide the necessary data. And here again, I would like to refer to the statements issued in October 2021, when the report referred to so many reasonable reasons that makes us believe that there are war crimes that were really perpetrated in Libya, of course, with reference to the violence that is targeting the victims in many jails. And of course, they have shed some further lights on the acts perpetrated by all the actors involved in the conflicts in Libya. This is in addition to the violations that are to be ascribed to some countries outside Libya, and that are contributing by sending some foreign fighters and some mercenaries. And these reports, which are issued by the fact-finding mission, even at the political level, they might cause a lot of embarrassment and diplomatic clashes with the countries which provide Libya with weapons and which is feeding the mercenaries and a specific media and political agenda. Just to give an example about the scope of the documentation and of the detection of this, given that the mandate of the mission goes from 2016 to now, and it refers to ongoing violations and quite varied. This, of course, would cripple all the efforts that are conducted by the national organization in Libya, and which probably are not able to put up with this huge ordeal in Libya. Also, the work and the agenda of the fact-finding mission in Libya on the basis of Article 10. Here again, the mission of the mission does support the institutions in Libya, and mostly the judicial and the security institutions, to help them carry out all the investigations. And there is an impending need for mutual cooperation between these institutions, especially when we know that the obstacles and the challenges that you mentioned did have a serious impact on the lack of accountability and on the impunity that is prevailing in Libya for the perpetrators. And the last experience, as expressed by the mission, shows that this mission has acquired a great deal of experience to put up with most of the challenges that they faced on the ground. And I think that if we expanded the support, and especially the mission will definitely be able to do better work. And I think that the Libyan institutions will benefit greatly from the conclusions of this mission. The major problem that we are facing in Libya is the problem of impunity, and of course the lack of accountability, and this leaves us to operate in a vicious circle and to face the impending danger to reiterate all these violations and breaches and these conflicts. And of course this is why we do reiterate our need to expand the mission and the scope of this fact-finding mission. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that, for your remarks. And thanks for reminding us in particular that Libya, of course, was instrumental in requesting the establishment of the FFM initially, but also for outlining the violations that continue to occur, and also the multiple actors involved, or multiple perpetrators, I should say, involved, and the vicious cycle of violence that's created by impunity. And thanks also, we heard your call that the FFM would really benefit from expanded support to undertake its work. So we will now, I'll now hand to the next speaker, and that is, next we will hear from Nadège Lahmar. She is the Maghreb researcher at the Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, Lucy. If we perhaps could give the floor to the fact-finding mission, perhaps Hasiba? Or was she not?
Hasiba with us?
Yeah, sure. Thank
Okay.
you.
Oh, I see. It's confusing because your name doesn't say your name, but that's okay, no problem. So I will introduce you properly. Thank you for joining us. So we had hoped, of course, that the chair of the fact-finding mission could join us, but I understand he's had some technical difficulties. So instead we will hear from Hasiba Haj Sahrawi, excuse me for the mispronunciation. And you are, of course, the gender advisor and the sexual and gender-based violence investigator with the fact-finding mission secretariat. Thanks very much for joining us and stepping in. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, and it's a real pleasure to be joining friends and colleagues on this panel. However, I need to start by apologizing for the chair, who passes his greetings and also in a way him having an internet issue is quite symptomatic of some of the difficulties that the FFM has faced, and with a lot of our work being done remotely and us facing regularly internet and connectivity issues. He's terribly sorry. He had wanted to be with you to talk also about his engagement with the Libyan authorities. So I'm going to try to step in, but of course we'll never be able to describe his engagement with the Libyan authorities as well as he would have been able to do so. The FFM, since its establishment, has faced huge challenges. And maybe let's start with the challenge of the scope of the mandate of the FFM. The fact-finding mission is to investigate human rights violations and human rights abuses, as well as violations of international humanitarian law in Libya since 2016. So it's very broad time-wise. It's also broad issue-wise, so it's all human rights violations and abuses, as well as violations of international humanitarian law. In addition to that, and as highlighted by Marwan, it's not as if the situation has improved dramatically. Conflict has subsided. However, the situation remains extremely tense with ongoing developments that we need to capture in our work. So while we are finalizing the report, we are still investigating ongoing violations that are taking place in Libya. And probably, as by the time we present the report on the 6th or 7th of July, we would have again to update and to make sure that in the interactive dialogue, we are able to reflect the latest developments, as we know currently what the political situation is in Libya and its possible ramification on human rights violations and violations of international humanitarian law. So there was how broad the mandate was an issue, but it could have been an opportunity if we didn't have at the same time all the challenges that the whole world has faced, but that's COVID challenges that have significantly delayed our work. So therefore, while on paper the FFM seems to have had sufficient time to do its work, in reality it has not, because of COVID restrictions. But then also the third layer of difficulties that we faced, and thank you, Marwan, again for highlighting the instrumental role that the Libyan authorities have played in setting up the FFM and continuing to support the FFM. That support at time has been tested. For example, obtaining visas has never been a straightforward process. Gaining access to some places in Libya are also extremely challenging due to the security situation. And I think one of our greatest disappointments has been the inability of the FFM to visit Sabha and the south of Libya. We had worked on a visit to the south of Libya. We had very positive response from local authorities and people in the south, really welcoming an opportunity of the FFM coming to the south and also listening to their grievances and trying to capture their experience in our work. However, at the last minute, we were not able to visit the south due to a combination of factors, most notably the security situation in the south. Even when we had access to places of detention, when we had access to other parts of Libya, we didn't have the level of access that would have fully enabled us to investigate all human rights violations and abuses. A key point in this has been access to places of detention, to prisons, be it detention of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, or prisons such as Mitiga prison or Kouefia prison. Well, we have been able to visit one place. We were never able to really hold interviews in private with detainees. And that takes us to maybe one of the most significant challenges that we have faced is the threat and the intimidation that people who engage with the FFM are facing or may be at risk of facing. And that is twofold. In a way, there are challenges and threats that people might be facing because of the presence of armed groups and some of the perpetrators who remain extremely present in the country, even in places where the perpetrators have allegedly left the place, such as Tarhuna. People are still extremely scared to come forward and to fully disclose their experience. But we also have a number of limitations that are due to the situation of civil society organizations at large and human rights activists and defenders in particular. So what we've been dealing with and what we've highlighted continuously in our work is the legal environment that is creating an environment that's leading to a situation that's not conducive to cooperation with the United Nations and cooperation with an independent mechanism. There are some legal provisions, in particular Decree 286, for example, that requires activists to actually seek permission before engaging with the United Nations, and that's a serious impediment. Second, we have also collected information and testimonies of people who were told even the UN could not save you, so do not do this. So the threats are also very clear and mentioning the role of international organizations such as the fact-finding mission. But it's also, so you have the direct threats and you also have the whole environment that is really about suppressing dissenting voices, about suppressing criticism of the authorities, criticism of the human rights record. We have also documented a number of cases where human rights activists or activists, be it political activists or very grassroots activists, might have been arrested and detained or sometimes tortured and subjected to other ill treatment simply for criticizing one authority. Sometimes things as benign as a post on Facebook can land you in prison. And that is an environment that we need to take into account. And a key principle in our work is to do no harm. And even if people sometimes are willing to take the chance and are willing to take the risk, it is our responsibility to try to minimize any harm of people engaging with the fact-finding mission. So all this has meant that a lot of our work has been done remotely with sometimes the technology challenges that we face. When it comes to, I just want to go back to our engagement with the Libyan authorities. So we have been able to go to a number of places. And when I say we, maybe I should distinguish the team of investigators versus the experts. And both groups have been able to visit Libya. So investigation teams were able to visit Tripoli, but not Benghazi. We were not able to visit the south at all. We've been to Tarhuna, but then there are lots of constraints in how we can operate, and constraints range from obtaining visas, obtaining road movements authorization to be able to move within the country, to also making sure that there's enough accommodation to accommodate the whole team in Libya due to the security situations. And however, all these difficulties hopefully have not stopped us from trying to fulfill our mandate. Already in our October report, we have reached a number of conclusions. And for example, in relation to detention, deprivation of liberty, where we believe that we had reasonable ground to believe that crimes against humanity might be committed against people in detention. We've looked at some specific places of detention. We've also looked at the situations of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, and we similarly concluded that we had sufficient ground to believe, reasonable grounds, sorry, to believe that crimes against humanity were committed against migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. We have continuously raised the situation of civil society activists, and this is of great concern, especially as I highlighted earlier, the situation is not static. As we speak today, there are currently activists who are detained in Libya, in all parts of Libya, simply for peacefully expressing their views, which might be critical of the authorities, or simply for their peacefully held beliefs, which might not be compatible, might not be in line with the overwhelming religious views, for example, in the country. So, we have continued to do so, and will continue to do so. We have looked also at the situation of IDPs, but certainly not to the extent that we wanted to look into the situation of IDP. We do know that that remains a huge consideration. We've looked at conduct of hostility. So even if the conflict has currently subsided, you still have pockets of violence, and you also have lots of incidents that we need to look back at and investigate as post facto, which is also representing some challenges. It's quite difficult to investigate an event that is happening now and to collect that evidence that is so key versus investigating an attack that might have happened in 2016 or 2017, where a lot of the people, the victims, might have moved, people might just have moved on in their life, and it's much more difficult to document this. We've looked at the situation of women as well, with some emblematic cases. Unfortunately, as we speak, we're still talking with the cautionary tale of women politicians who have been forcibly disappeared in the period that is covered by the mandate. And I'm having in mind, I'm talking here about a member of House of Representatives, CIHRS, who is still missing. We had reached some preliminary conclusion in our October report. We talked also other women activists who might have been killed, or critics simply, such as Hanan al-Barasi. But we've looked also at more structural issues, also problems with the law, but also the practices that enable or facilitate sexual violence, for example. So really a very wide range of issues we're looking, and in our March and in our upcoming report, we're also looking at the impediments to the establishment of restoration of the rule of law and a functioning institution in Libya. And that meant looking at elections, human rights related violations around elections, but also attacks on the judiciary. So very wide. And then due to the challenges, and we do have for the moment a feeling of an unachieved job. So much needs to be done. We've talked to so many victims who are expecting so much from the Libyan authorities, but also from the fact-finding mission, to be able to recount their experience in an independent manner, and also to help them obtaining accountability and transitional justice for their loved ones whom they've lost. And that is a responsibility that we have taken extremely seriously. And that we feel that at this stage, if we we haven't been able to fully respond to that request coming on the one hand by the authorities, and as highlighted by Marwan, the FFM was set up at the request of the authorities with the support of the authorities, but also to respond to the aspiration for justice of ordinary Libyans. And in this regard, I also want to point to a report that was issued yesterday by Lawyers for Justice in Libya that really highlighted what are the demands of ordinary Libyans and what do they expect from the authorities and also from the international community. And this is a responsibility that we need to take extremely seriously and to respond to their aspiration for peace, but also for justice and for reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hasiba. I really appreciate you stepping in, and it was really helpful to hear about the work of the fact-finding mission, including some of the conclusions that have already been reached, the access that the team has had. We heard also about the concerns that the team has in relation to the environment for civil society, and particularly therefore their ability to engage with the fact-finding mission. And in particular, I think your call at the end in relation to victims and ordinary Libyans who have great expectations of what additional work the fact-finding mission can and should be doing. And so thanks for drawing our attention to that. So I will now pass on to Nadège Lahmar, who I introduced before. She is the Maghreb researcher at the Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies. And sorry, Lahmar, before you take the floor, just reminding everyone that if they do have questions, please put them in the Q&A or in the chat as we go along. Okay, thanks. Go ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Thanks to all our panelists, and thank you to our state sponsors and UNSMIL for supporting this event. I hope you all can hear me well. I'll try to be brief, but a few main points, basically essential points that I wanted to highlight about accountability in Libya and the importance of the renewal and what would happen if there is no renewal, basically. So to go back, I think several of the panelists have already highlighted this, but there is a human rights crisis in Libya. I think we can call it a human rights crisis. And this is majorly fed by widespread impunity and by something that we can easily call an accountability, a huge accountability gap. This accountability gap is fed by the fact that the national judiciary is not able to play its role due to the direct or indirect domination of armed groups and militias affiliated to official or de facto authorities. These armed groups have been empowered to play the role of security and law enforcement and have implemented their own parallel justice system, basically, which has taken over Libya. And I think even the last report from the FFM highlights that the capacity of the judicial sector to play its role has even decreased. It hasn't even stayed the same, but it has decreased. So the situation has even worsened in recent years. And these groups, I believe my colleague Hussein will insist more on this point, but these groups, among them are perpetrators of violations, continue also to benefit from vast sums of state money, all the while continuing to operate only nominally under state security institutions with no oversight. And parallel to the situation, we see that still on Libya, there are very few international avenues for accountability. The ICC was very important. Its ability to address the impunity gap is impeded by various important constraints. In terms of universal jurisdiction, there are only a limited number of cases that are able to access it. And in terms of sanctions, it's also constrained by political considerations. So there are also, if you look at the context internationally, very few avenues for accountability aside from the work of the FFM. So the impunity gap persists in Libya and even grows, and there is a crucial need for more avenues for justice and accountability, and even at the most basic level, there needs to be more documentation. The violations that are documented that end up in reports, UN reports, the reports of the FFM, reports from other NGOs and civil society are only a portion of the reality of abuses currently happening in Libya or that have happened in the past. Now, my second point is that because this human rights crisis is a crisis of impunity, it is directly related to the political crisis. It cannot be divorced from it. Advancing impunity is critical to advancing the political process. If we look at the political situation in Libya, post-2011 political elites supported by or dependent on affiliated armed groups have approached the political transition in many ways as a zero-sum competition for the complete control of the country. So conflict over territory and resources has allowed them to build legitimacy, if we can call it that, and gain nominal power. These actors have never, however, had genuine popular legitimacy due to the way they operate. Their main objective has been to support the system in place and raise their own status within this own system. So this has directly impeded the progress of the political process, and also in many ways contributed to sidelining the UN process. So in this context, continued impunity has only given them free rein to continue these behaviors and to maximize state control and corrupt practices, contributing to maintaining an environment favorable to electoral maneuvers between unrepresentative institutions and armed groups. My last point, now that I try to kind of explain the accountability crisis, the way it's linked to the political situation, what would happen if this accountability gap is not addressed, and through this, what would happen if the FFM is not renewed. First of all, for victims, it would mean in many ways, if Libya does not support the renewal, if the council members do not support and do all they can to support the renewal, it would mean in many ways abandoning possibilities for remedy for victims. When we speak about the human rights crisis in Libya, we speak about routine extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances and secret detention, horrific acts of physical, sexual, and psychological torture. So we need to put the victim's voice in the center and think, when we think about the need for renewal of the FFM, that not getting this renewal means in many ways abandoning them. At another level for Libya, a lack of renewal would send a dangerous message to the political class and affiliated armed groups that I mentioned, that basically sending the message that the Human Rights Council and its members are not able or willing to support a fact-finding mission that said, whose members have said themselves that their mandate is not completed. And it would most likely embolden them at the political level, but also at the military level. Largely wider than this at the international level. I also wanted to add that in terms of the context, if we are still working towards elections, it would also considerably weaken the possibilities of organizing free and fair elections and supporting a legitimate democratic transition in Libya if we are not able to support a simple process documenting violations and contributing to justice. One of the key issues that happened with the previous failure to hold elections in December is also the lack of attention being put on ensuring that basic conditions are in place for free and fair elections. And one of these conditions is justice and accountability. My last point is the message that we'll send on the international level in terms of the international rule of law and the rules-based order. And behind this, the UN's ability and the ability of some of the most powerful countries in the world to preserve this order. In a context where specificities of the Libyan conflict have already done a lot of damage to this international rule of law. We've seen the unprecedented use of foreign mercenaries, the use of drones, the ineffective arms embargo. This has already done a lot of damage. And we see also we're in a context where the Human Rights Council has already failed last year to renew the mandate of another similar mechanism, the Group of Eminent Experts on Yemen. So in this context, and also in a post-Ukraine context, in which in many ways Russia's attack on Ukraine built on previous patterns of interventions in Middle Eastern or African countries, notably Syria and Libya. And this was enabled by a lack of international commitment to accountability in these countries. So in this context, I do believe that it will send a very dangerous political message in Libya and internationally that if we fail to renew the FFM. Therefore, renewal is only crucially needed, but also we need, in terms of a mandate, to have a strong mandate of at least 1 year. And both Libya and member states of the Council should do everything they can in their power to ensure that it happens and we obtain renewal. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadège. Thanks very much for reminding us about the accountability gap, not only at the national level, but also the limited avenues at the international levels, and therefore the important role that the FFM plays at the international level in relation to accountability, and also for bringing us back to the point that a number of speakers now have made, is that we should be listening to and having victims at the centre of our thinking in relation to this. So thanks very much. I'll pass the floor now to our next speaker, and that is Hussein Baoumi. He is the Egypt and Libya researcher at Amnesty International. Thanks very much, Hussein. You have the floor.
Thank you. So I was just in Libya in February this year, and there I met scores of victims and the families of victims who were victimized at the hands of militias, armed groups, traffickers, and states involved in the conflict. They have been subjected to arbitrary deprivation of liberty, torture, forced labor, sexual violence, unlawful killings, extrajudicial executions, unfair trials, including by military courts. And they met knowing that they could be at risk of reprisals by their abusers, but they met because they still have faith in the international community to deliver justice. In Tripoli, I met a man from Hon, a city under control of armed groups going by the name the Libyan Arab Armed Forces, and he told me how Libyan Arab Armed Forces fighters abducted and tortured him, including by hanging him over a door, whipping him as he was being subjected to electric shocks. I saw marks of his torture. The flesh around his ankle was at some point gone, leaving maggots to grow there. During his detention, he saw his cousin die from torture in the same prison. He told me that if he doesn't see justice, he will make justice with his own hands. One of his torturers is from Tawarga, who would say that his actions were in revenge for the forced displacement and abuses against Tawargans. The Libyan government and the international community have so far to deliver justice to the thousands of victims of the Libyan Arab Armed Forces and its affiliated armed groups across eastern and southern Libya. In Tripoli as well, Misrata, I met with victims of abusive militias operating in western Libya. One of them, a police officer, recalled how a powerful militia leader would beat him with anything he could lay his hands on and subjected him to mock execution, including asking him to stand next to a wall and he would fire live rounds at him. He said that since leaving prison, his life has fell apart. Wherever he sees the abuser on television, he could only think of how to seek revenge. A refugee from Eritrea recalled me how he attempted to escape Libya, but his boat was intercepted by a militia who imprisoned and tortured him while no one knew where he was as they tried to extort him. Then he managed to escape. After our visit, we documented how Misrata-based militiamen shot and killed in cold blood a man who was running from them. The Libyan government and the international community have failed to bring justice to the thousands of victims of the countless militias and armed groups operating in western Libya. In Tarhuna, where justice remains elusive 2 years after the discovery of mass graves in the town, I remember a 15-year-old child who told me how Kenny had abducted his father from his house while he hid under a bed. His father's body was found in one of Tarhuna's many mass graves. I asked him about school, but he said he doesn't care. He only wants revenge for his father. So far, the Libyan authorities and the international community have failed to bring him or the scores of bereaved families in Tarhuna justice. In Sirte, local authorities and armed groups affiliated with the Libyan Arab Armed Forces prevented us from speaking to locals, surrounded us, and harassed us for the entirety of the visit until they picked us out of the city or beyond the borders of the city. This is but a small glimpse of challenges facing civil society working towards accountability in Libya. Over the past years, militias and armed groups have assassinated, abducted, tortured, and threatened Libyan human rights defenders with absolute impunity, forcing many to flee Libya. The Libyan justice system has proven unable or unwilling to redress victims of abuses. Within the last 12 months alone, we saw the abduction of a prosecutor by a militia in Tripoli, the siege of a courthouse in Sabha, and the intimidation of judges in relation to the cancelled December 2021 elections. The Libyan judiciary also cannot reasonably be expected to be able to hold the Russian Wagner mercenaries accountable for their role in planting the landmines that led to the deaths of dozens in Tripoli and Sirte. At the same time, we saw the Libyan prosecution and judiciary prosecuting young men, including a human rights defender, for peacefully expressing their views on social media. Now they're on trial inside the base of a militia in Tripoli. But instead of holding those responsible to account, various governments have so far attempted to integrate abusive militias and armed groups in state structures without any vetting, without holding anyone accountable first, therefore legitimizing and funding their continued criminal behavior, while their victims could only watch without anything to do in their hands. Now, extending the fact-finding mission would send a message to victims, as well as militias, armed groups, traffickers, and states involved in the conflict, that the Libyan government and the international community are not ready to sacrifice justice. But failure to extend the mandate, however, would send a very dangerous message that neither the Libyan government nor the international community are genuinely interested in justice. It would send a message to the victims in Libya that the only way to redress what they have been subjected to is through one's bloody hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Hussein. Appreciate that very sobering update about the current human rights situation in Libya and the horrific crimes that you described. I will pass the floor now to our final speaker, that is Elham Saudi. She's the Director of Lawyers for Justice in Libya. And a reminder again, after Elham has spoken, we'll go to the floor for a Q&A, so please submit any questions that you have. Thanks very much, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I have the task of following some very thorough interventions, and so much of what I've been thinking about has been covered, and so perhaps I'll try to look at the situation from a slightly different angle. We have reflected a lot on the importance to do this for the purposes of accountability and in the pursuit of some form of truth seeking, which are vital. But I also want to put them in the context of what's happening in Libya in these last 48 hours. Yesterday was the end of the official roadmap for the peace process, the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum, which would end any possible legitimacy for the current government of national unity. It was also, ironically, the announcement of the start of the reconciliation process by the Presidential Council created by the LPDF, whose own legitimacy is also questionable given the finality of the roadmap. What's more disturbing was the reaction of the international community to the announcement of the reconciliation process, which effectively was a lot of hoopla by speakers on it who are themselves implicated in violations, themselves implicated in crimes, initiating this excellent process, quote unquote, of reconciliation. There was a lot of welcoming of it without any real looking at the details of what this reconciliation process, which is effectively a forgive and forget model. And I think I want to take a moment to reflect on that, because one of the biggest failures of the political process in Libya is precisely the lack of accountability built into it, is precisely the lack of a human rights-based approach to the process. The political expediency of that process, the convenience of that process is why we are where we are today in this culture of impunity that all of the previous speakers have referenced. And what we will see again, if this fact-finding mission is not renewed, is a further endorsement of the international community of the culture of impunity. It's all good and well to hear some really great endorsements and words from Suki on the importance of the fact-finding mission, on the importance of its role. They're great, their statement that came out on the need to renew it. However, the political arm of the UNSMIL mission or the UN approach to this is not on the same message. They are making deals, they're seeking compromises that compromise the fundamental basis of accountability. Reconciliation is not a tool, reconciliation is an outcome. And the only way you can achieve reconciliation is if you pursue accountability, if you pursue truth, if you pursue reparations, and you take a victim-centered approach. What does that mean in practice? It means that the focus goes away from putting the pressure on the victims to forgive, but instead puts it on the perpetrators to repent and take responsibility. And what we've seen to date is constant pressure on victims to take the lead on this work. The fact-finding mission is really the only remaining tool we have for the truth in Libya. As mentioned by several speakers before me, and most poignantly by Hussein, is the attack on civil society. Normally, civil society fills the gap in truth-finding when the state fails. But the systematic crackdown in civil society in Libya at the moment is not incidental and is not coincidental. It's intentional, it's deliberate, because it is impeding the peace process and it's impeding a reconciliation, quote unquote, based on forgive and forget and an amnesty-led process. The fact-finding mission helps us as civil society to counter that narrative and to counter that approach. It gives us the tools to do that. It will give future transitional justice mechanisms the tool to hold those accountable who have not only been complicit in the crimes and have conducted the crimes, but are currently taking the lead in negotiating the peace. And I think this is the process that I think it's important for us to have an honest conversation about the holistic situation in Libya, because this differentiation between Geneva and New York, human rights and security, is what's feeding into this problem. And it's what's creating the pockets for impunity that have overtaken the entire country. And we've seen, from my personal experience, but from other experiences, and I can see from people sitting in the attendees who know this experience, that the failure of the political process is precisely because there was no accountability in the process, whether that's a vetting process, whether that's applying more of a stick than a carrot to the process. And that's because of this continuous separation between politics and human rights. And if the Human Rights Council gets sucked in wrongly into this by saying, well, actually, the fact-finding mission won't be renewed, then what we will see is the worst version of human rights succumbing to the political or succumbing to the security, instead of pushing the agenda on that and holding that side of the UN system accountable as well. And so the renewal of the mandate is not just about a renewal or about what we've seen a lot in the Libyan context, just technical, rollovers in all the mechanisms we have, but it needs to be a deliberate and intentional renewal. We need to see a longer period than what we've seen before. This, the short period that the fact-finding mission means is not just the fact that they didn't have the time to do the work, but it's really difficult, just practically to recruit people, to retain people, if all they're being given is short-term contracts, and to do the work that is needed in Libya. And I hate to be the kind of doom and gloom, but the work that's likely to be needed in Libya in the light of the cancelled elections and in the period we're entering as of today, we've returned to two competing governments, both of which are illegitimate. We need the fact-finding mission more than we ever did, and we need it for a longer period of time than we did, because it needs to really be the check on the political process that indicates that someone is watching, that someone is there to document what is happening. If they leave, it's a carte blanche for every politician to do whatever they want to get to power. The other thing we need to think about the mandate is the renewal cannot be just a time renewal. There needs to be an intentional renewal. And by that, I mean, there needs to be more resources allocated to the fact-finding mission, both in terms of human resources, but also in terms of financial resources and the like, so that they can do their work at the scale that they need to do the work. And the Libyan state not only needs to be reminded of their role in all of this, and that they, that there should be no question that they should be supporting the renewal of the mandate, but they need to be required through the mandate to proactively and continuously throughout the mandates of the fact-finding mission cooperate and support the mission by ensuring access to key locations and ensuring access to key witnesses. And so I think we need to really contextualize this, and we need to be really deliberate in our asks. And this is the moment where the international community will show its true colors, whether it's standing with the people of Libya and pursuing accountability and a human rights-based political process, or whether it's a process of appeasement of those who have caused this conflict.
Thank you very much, Elham. It's useful, I think, to conclude there the panel of speakers kind of linking back to the wider political situation, and as you emphasise, kind of the importance of human rights for that broader context, but also appreciate your call for a very deliberate and longer renewal of the fact-finding mission mandate, and pointing out the difficulties that a shorter renewal poses, just in terms of basic questions like staffing and resourcing of the mandate, and therefore their ability to complete their mandate. So thanks very much. So that concludes our panel of speakers. We have a number of questions. Before we get to those, I would like to hand over, there are a number of state representatives who are with us today and who would like to take the floor first. So I'm going to begin with the permanent representative for the Netherlands, Ambassador Paul Beckers, who would like to make some comments. You have the floor, Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Well, let me start by saying that I want to thank the organizers and co-sponsors, Switzerland, Germany, and the UN, for facilitating this important discussion, the work of the fact-finding mission in Libya. And I think actually I can already in part respond to the latest speaker, who raised an issue at the very end of her intervention. And the work of the fact-finding mission in Libya is of great importance, since it contributes to sustainable stability, to human rights and national reconciliation in multiple ways. We're all here together because we deeply care about the human rights situation in Libya and aim to support it the best way we can. In that light, I also want to thank all the participating organizations for your tireless efforts in this regard. We are aware of the special nature of this fact-finding mission. The fact that the Libyan authorities requested this mission themselves and supported it throughout the process clearly shows the commitment of the authorities to advance human rights in Libya. I would like to take this opportunity to commend them for it. Despite the initial obstacles, the mission has been able to publish 2 rich reports with impactful findings. However, as indicated by representatives of the fact-finding mission, their important work is not finished yet. By extending their mandate, the FFM can continue and deepen their important work to advance human rights in Libya. I never know where the camera exactly is, so I hope I am addressing you properly. I think it's on that side, but I'm not sure. Apologies if it's wrong. Anyway, to continue, this also provides for the possibility of cooperation between the fact-finding mission and Libyan institutions, capacity building and technical assistance to advance the protection of human rights and accountability processes across the country. Yesterday, my colleagues in Libya were pleased to attend the launch of the Strategic Vision and Action Plan for National Reconciliation by the Libyan Presidential Council. We stand ready to continue cooperation towards reconciliation, justice, and peace. We see great value in the work of the fact-finding mission, also from this perspective. The Netherlands fully supports the fact-finding mission and encourages the Libyan authorities to extend this mandate to the benefit of all Libyans. We stand ready to support the Libyan authorities and the FFM in this process. And thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the opportunity to convey this message. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Beckers, and particularly for the Netherlands' support. I understand we also have with us a representative from the Permanent Mission of Switzerland, Ms. Barbara Fontana. Barbara, would you take the floor, please? Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, thanks.
Perfect, thank you so much. And just to begin, on behalf of Switzerland, I really would like to thank the organizers for convening this side event on the independent fact-finding mission on Libya. I would also like to thank Hasiba for her presentation, as we are looking forward to the report of the FFM. From the first discussions in 2019, Switzerland has been fully supportive of the establishment of the fact-finding mission. From the beginning, we have always insisted on the necessity to guarantee its independence and impartiality in order to ensure that it could address violations committed by all sides throughout the Libyan territory. Switzerland has repeatedly commended the support and the cooperation of the Libyan government with the fact-finding mission. We also believe that the mission can play an enabling role for technical cooperation. Indeed, impartial and independent fact-finding on the violations is not only a means to address impunity and hold perpetrators accountable, it is also an essential building block for a transitional justice process leading to national reconciliation. Despite considerable progress achieved in difficult circumstances, it is clear, in our view, that the work of the FFM is incomplete, and we've heard much today to underline that fact. Switzerland therefore supports the extension of the mandate for the time necessary to fulfill the mandate. We have been engaging in several discussions over the last weeks. We also have released, as already mentioned by our colleague from UNSMIL, the public statement in support of the FFM renewal as co-chairs of the IHL and Human Rights Working Group of the Berlin process, along with UNSMIL and obviously Netherlands. I would like to thank you once again for organizing this event. You are giving a strong signal by coming together as numerous Libyan civil society organizations, many of whom are our direct partners, and we hope that your call will be heard. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to Switzerland for their support. I also now would like to pass the floor to a representative of the Permanent Mission of Germany, Ms. Natalia Kanan. Natalia, if you hear me, yes, you can take the floor. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. I hope you can hear me. So first of all, I also want to thank today's panelists and organizers for this event and for sharing their views and insight. Germany remains fully committed to peace and stability for all people in Libya, and we see human rights also as an integral part of the Berlin process, believing that reconciliation and transitional justice are preparing the ground for a long-lasting peace, the peace that the Libyan people deserve so much. The FFM has done important work to contribute to this aim. But at the same time, we agree that they did not have enough time yet to fulfill their mandate to the full extent. An extension of their mandate would not only allow them to complete their work, but could also contribute to further national capacity building. In this regard, also the length of the extension is of essential importance. So far, despite all challenges, we see that Libya has demonstrated a high degree of ownership regarding the FFM, and we believe this has the potential to become a success story, a benefit for the people in Libya. But we really have to keep the momentum. Last but not least, we acknowledge first and foremost the tireless dedication of many Libyan people, especially the youth, to uphold their rights and stand up for a better future beyond any mandate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll now, as I said, pass to the floor for a question and answer session. We have a number of questions already in the chat and also in the Q&A box. So I think I will read out a number of questions and then panelists for whom the question is relevant can feel free to intervene. So I'll begin with the first question. This is a question specifically for Hasiba, but others should feel free also to answer as well. And that is, how would a failure to renew the UN fact-finding mission and therefore continued impunity impact current political negotiations? So that's the question. And then the second one, which is also related, would the fact-finding mission look into or touch upon the important question of whether in the prevailing circumstances, the Libya justice system would even be able to deliver justice in relation to the relevant crimes? And what is the point of pretending that is the case is otherwise for over 11 years? So yeah, two questions there directed to the fact-finding mission representative, but open to others as well. So can I give the floor first to Hasiba? Go ahead.
I think I see a message from Elham saying that Libya is asking for the floor, and maybe if we could proceed with the representative of Libya first. Good.
So I don't see that. Perhaps the representative of Libya could identify in the chat who you are so that we know.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Oh, hello, yes. Can you
Hello.
please, introduce yourself so that we know who you are, who's speaking?
I'm Dr. Nasser from a counselor at the Libyan mission in Geneva here. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak regarding these important issues of the work of the FFM in Libya. I haven't been able to follow the whole event since the beginning, so I don't know what's being said by the panelists throughout this session, but let me make a few points regarding the FFM in Libya. As you all know, that the establishment of the fact-finding mission in Libya was a Libyan initiative. This is something was unprecedented in the establishment of such country mechanisms to monitor the situation of human rights in the country. This shows the willingness and the political will of the Libyan Authority to promote human rights and fight impunity. This is something that has been must be remembered all the time throughout the work of this special mechanism. So the establishment of this mechanisms was a Libyan initiative, and the Libyan ownership of this mechanisms must be maintained throughout the work of this special mechanism. We have received, two reports since this work's establishment. This FFM was established, and the last time the mandate was renewed for 9 months in order for it to complete and finalize its work. And now we are again here in the 50 sessions of the Human Rights Council, and the FFM, due to so many reasons, that they're asking for a renew again for the mandate in order to complete and accomplish its mission. We in Libya, we understand that there is difficulties associated with the work of FFM that hasn't been didn't enable the mission to complete its mission. There is a lot of work to do, and there is a visit to Sabha also to go to the south, and also to monitor the situation there and document the human rights violations occurred in that region. And we also recognize the need to continue the work regarding Tarhuna mass graves. But we stress the importance of coming to conclusion of the work of the FFM. We understand this is a temporary measure. It is for a specific period of time, and it is important to have the outcome and the recommendations of the FFM in order for the Libyan authorities to build on these conclusions and findings of the FFM. It is very vital for the conclusion of the work of the FFM in order for our transitional justice process in Libya, and also for national reconciliation. I'm sure that you are aware of the initiative by the Libyan Presidential Council for the yesterday. They announced the start of the national reconciliation process, which was with the participation of all parties in Libya. Also, a few days ago, the Council of Ministers issued a resolution to establish the national mechanism for reporting and follow-up and implementation for human rights, which is a huge step, and also shows the commitment of the Libyan Authority to promote human rights and fight impunity. So while we understand there is a need for a renewal of the mandate of the FFM, but we must remember that the conclusion and the finding of the FFM is important and is much weighted from the Libyan authorities to take actions upon these recommendations and findings. Any delay of the conclusion of the work of FFM will lead to the delay of the start of the Libyan-led process in fighting impunity and establishing the transitional justice and reconciliation. We believe that the national mechanisms is well equipped and also better equipped to deal with human rights violations because they're closer to the victims, and it's the natural and the normal way of achieving justice. The judiciary and the public prosecutions have been doing so much in Libya regarding the work of fighting extradition, the forced disappearance, and also regarding the issue of Tarhuna, and also regarding the violation against migrants as well. There has been a lot of been done so far, and I think at that moment when this FFM was established, it was in the mind of Libyans that it will lead to empowerment of the national mechanisms in order to be able to fight impunity and to promote human rights. So we understand that this is a temporary mechanisms, and we are waiting for its final conclusions and for Libyans to take over and to continue the work of FM. These are the points that I wanted to press, and we have been engaging with FFM here in Geneva, and also with other partners from the other missions, in order to have a successful outcome of this procedure and this special mechanisms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alietta. I think really appreciate you taking the time to attend this meeting and to give the perspective of Libya. We will now go back to the questions. I will pass the floor to Hessi, but do you need me to read the questions again, or are you okay to respond?
It's fine, thank you.
Okay, great.
And I'd like to thank also the representative of Libya for his contribution. And indeed, I think we are in agreement on many things. We are in agreement on the fact that the fact-finding mission is certainly not a substitution for the judiciary in Libya to provide justice for victims of human rights violations. Similarly, I think we're in agreement on the fact that the FFM was established at the request of the Libyan authorities and with the cooperation of the Libyan authorities, and we appreciate how special this is, including our ability to visit Libya and our ability to engage with the Libyan authorities, which is not the case of all FFMs. So very grateful for that. We are also in agreement on the need for justice and the need for national reconciliation. And in this regard, we believe that we've already, in our 2 previous reports, provided a number of recommendations that could be implemented immediately by the authorities.
Hello, Nasa, I believe that you haven't muted. Could you mute your microphone, please? Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe as the representative of the Libyan Permanent Mission was not here at the beginning, I would like to reiterate the apologies of the chair who was supposed to be on the panel and who had technical difficulties, and basically the whole internet seems to be down in the area where he is and was not able to join. So at the last minute I was requested to step in. Of course, whatever I say is a reflection of the views of the members of the FFM. So I think, as I was highlighting, we've already made a number of recommendations, and we're hoping to make a new set of recommendations in our upcoming report that would hopefully provide some suggestions to the Libyan authorities as they're trying to strengthen the rule of law in Libya, and as trying to build strong institutions. And that takes me as well to a question that was asked by one of the participants about whether the fact-finding mission would look at the role of the justice system and how to strengthen the justice system. We are already looking at it, and I think what's coming up very strongly is, on the one hand, the willingness of judges to address some of the violations, but also what's coming very strongly is the challenges that the justice system is facing and that judges and members of the legal profession are facing in Libya. The third set of concern that is coming up very strongly is the fact that victims of human rights violations and are not necessarily are quite defiant towards existing institutions, and for the moment do not have a trust in some of the institutions that are here to deliver justice and accountability as well as reparation to them. We have heard people, we have heard a very strong desire for justice, but also some skepticism as to the current ability in the current context to respond to these aspirations. So should the mandate of the FFM be extended, we would hope to focus on the legal profession among a range of issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciated. So we are at time now. Time has gone quickly, but I would like to give each of the panelists the opportunity to respond to the questions that that I've raised, but also to make any other final concluding comments before we conclude. Who would like to go first? Elham, can I pass the floor to you?
Sure.
Great, thanks.
I'll just conclude by welcoming the engagement from the Libyan state. That is not always the case, and so it is good to have engagement. I'm hoping for constructive engagement, and it would, you know, we understand that the fact-finding mission has started its work, but frankly, the abuses in Libya continue, and so until the government does a better job at governing and reducing those violations, there will always be a need for the fact-finding mission. And so I feel that the proposition put forward by the Libyan state was counterintuitive, because actually the need for the fact-finding mission has increased in the period since the Libyan state demanded it. And if the Libyan state's intention at starting it was all the intentions he suggested, then they should have the same intentions at this moment to renew it, because they all still stand valid.
Thank you very much. Hussein, Baoumi, would you like to take the floor?
Yeah, sure. So I just want to make 2 points. First, I want to in responses of intervention by the representative of Libya. First to thank the Libyan delegation in Geneva, for this engagement today, but also for facilitating visa access to Libya for Amnesty International delegation in February. And then in response to the point on the need for the fact-finding mission to bring it, or its work to come to an end. I agree really on that. However, the challenges that we are seeing in Libya is that the panelists have described so far, they are still ongoing. A lot of these violations have been ongoing, and we continue to see violations on almost daily basis right now. Now the Libyan judiciary and the Libyan authorities have primarily failed to hold the vast majority of those responsible for these violations accountable to date, including for a number of reasons. And the public prosecutor himself, actually, I remember in a statement that he gave to TV channel 2021 in relation to Tarhuna, he acknowledged the challenges facing the Libyan authorities and the Libyan prosecution and the Libyan judiciary in ensuring justice for the victims of Tarhuna. Indeed, justice has not been delivered yet. There are so many examples that can be given around this. So what we are seeing is that the situation in terms of the ability of the Libyan state to deliver justice has not changed since they led the resolution to establishing the fact-finding mission, and therefore it is now more than ever, it's very important for the Libyan state and the international community to extend the mandate of the fact-finding mission. And then just in response to a question around the situation of activists that have been detained Recently, since February 2021, we understand that at least 4 are currently on trial in front of a court by a militia, or like a court in a militia base in Tripoli, over charges do not constitute charges under international law and are solely on the basis of peacefully expressing their views in relation to this particular case, while calling on the Libyan authorities to immediately and unconditionally release.
Thank you very much, Hussein. Final comments from our colleague Suki Nagra from UNSMIL. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all the speakers today, and I very much support the comments that have been made. I'd also like to thank again and echo colleagues in terms of thanking the Libyan delegation for their participation and engagement. It's extremely important and much appreciated. I'd also reiterate that the FFM complements the state's role when it comes to justice accountability, and it doesn't work to challenge or undermine that role in any way, but to support it. And again, just to stress that the mechanism of the FFM is very much about supporting that future accountability and the rights of victims. We at the UN are continually stressing the need for a rights-based political process, a rights-based reconciliation process, and I think that the justice and accountability is very much the platform for that. And also we'd just like to again echo that other speakers what other speakers have noticed, that to date, widespread human rights violations are being perpetrated on the ground in Libya. You know, the role of armed groups in particular needs to be further investigated. That work has only just really begun. There needs to be an extended mandate of the FFM so that they can further investigate these grave accusations. And as colleagues have noted, there's a ceasefire in place in the country, but human rights violations are continuing, and now more than ever we need a robust mechanism that can and should investigate human rights violations. We as the UN have that role as well, but our job is very, very different to the FFM's, and we can't replace the FFM, but we complement its work and we fully support its work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll pass the floor now to Marwan Tashani. Do you have any concluding remarks?
شكرا جزيلا. أعتقد أن الكثير من الزملاء أشاروا
Thank you very much. I think that so many colleagues raised many issues that I would love to raise myself in order to justify the extension of the fact-finding mission in Libya. And of course, as we've heard, the extension came from initiative from Libya and from the African group. And of course, the work of this committee was seriously challenged, which led to the lack of completeness of the work of this mission. But for the extension of the work, if ever it is supported by Libya, it will be really appreciated, and that would definitely lead to create a mechanism of cooperation between the FFM and the ruling authorities in Libya, given that the Libyans are in utmost need for technical support as it is provided by the FFM. In addition to this, I think that the size of violation and the degree of perpetuation and the perpetuation of the conflict makes the work of the mission quite difficult, but we think that this mission has acquired enough experience and enough competencies to make its work easier in the future and more useful and more efficient in order. And of course, if Libya accepted to renew the mandate of this mission, and I think that this would be a positive move to serve the interests of everybody. And to serve the interests of the mission and to improve the state of human rights in Libya as a whole. And that will definitely help us to put up with the huge amount of violations that are perpetrated by the parties in the conflict in Libya. Thank you once more for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much. And the final word goes to Nadège Lahmar. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Very briefly, I want to thank Libya and the representative from the Libyan mission to have joined us today. We really appreciate your engagement and your intervention. We want to reiterate, however, that there is no contradiction between Libyan institutions' work to ensure accountability and to address these violations and the work of the FFM to document them. And it is in no way intended to replace, but only to support and complement the work of the Libyan institutions. Another thing is that we very much want to maintain Libyan ownership ideally in this mandate, and that is why we only ask that the mandate of the FFM is actually completed. The mandate that Libya gave the FFM has not been completed, and that has been explained by Hasiba and others, and we need for this mandate to be completed given by Libya we need that the mission has at least another 1 year at the very minimum at full capacity with a proper time frame to be able to meet and to finish this mandate that Libya has given the mission. And I want to also reiterate that Libya, in its commitment to the political transition, its commitment to the democratic transition and to Libyan-led, Libyan-owned process, should fully support mechanisms such as the FFM that are fully in line with these commitments. And again, we fully appreciate your engagement, and I think we as civil society, but also the mission and UNSMIL are fully committed and ready to support you and engage with you to make sure that the mission also meets Libya's needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadège. So we are over time, and I apologize for that, and that we didn't get to more of the questions, and I don't think I need to go into further what I think the panelists have really eloquently described about the role of the fact-finding mission and the importance of its renewal at this session of the UN Human Rights Council. We are waiting with bated breath for the resolution to be presented by the African group together with Libya, and really hope that it does include the renewal of the fact-finding mission's mandate. I'd like to thank all of the panelists today. I really appreciate their time and expertise that they've shared with us. And also I'd like to thank all of the co-sponsors who have supported this event. And thank you to you as well, the attendees, for your participation. Okay, thanks a lot. Have a good day. Bye-bye.